Hello and welcome. Kathy Kressel here. One of the best things about sharing my research into the people, places, and events in the past of Northern Illinois is the people that I meet. Darren Marlar and I have been friends for years, and we're both interested in stories of the weird, the unexplained, and the paranormal. But we also enjoy sharing true crime and other stories as well. Darren has been very generous with his time helping the Haunted Rockford crew get our YouTube channel off the ground. This video is a recent episode of Darren's podcast, Weird Darkness, in its entirety, and I want to be sure to thank Darren for his permission to share it with you on the Haunted Rockford channel. Be sure to watch the segment in this episode based on one of my stories. Please read the video description for more information. If you're not yet a fan of the Weird Darkness YouTube channel, please check it out and subscribe. Let Darren know that I sent you. And now here's Darren.
Ads heard during the podcast that are not in my voice are placed by third-party agencies outside of my control and should not imply an endorsement by Weird Darkness or myself.
Stories and content in Weird Darkness can be disturbing for some listeners and is intended for mature audiences only. Parental discretion is strongly advised.
Professor Nathaniel Carter wiped sweat from his brow as he carefully brushed sand away from the limestone slab. For 3 years, his team has been searching for the tomb of Amen-Hamat, a lesser-known priest from Egypt's 18th dynasty. The discovery of this entrance, hidden beneath shifting desert sands for over 3 millennia, was a career-defining moment. "I found something," he called to his colleagues. "There are hieroglyphics here beneath the cartouche." Dr. Eliza Warren, his longtime research partner, hurried over, followed by Nathaniel's graduate assistant, Malik. His wife Sarah, who had joined the expedition to photograph the findings, aimed her camera at the partially revealed entrance. "Can you translate it?" Sarah asked, adjusting her lens. Nathaniel nodded, tracing his fingers just above the ancient symbols carved into the stone doorway. "It's a warning of some kind, standard for tombs of this period." The team worked through the afternoon heat, carefully exposing the entrance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the excavation site, Nathaniel's excitement grew. The hieroglyphics were unlike any he'd seen before, more intricate, with unusual symbols interspersed among the familiar characters. "Those who disturb the eternal rest shall know the wrath of Anubis," he translated out loud. "The breath of the unworthy shall turn to fire, their blood to sand, their bones to dust." Eliza chuckled. "Cheerful as always." "Wait." Nathaniel squinted, leaning closer. There's more here, a smaller inscription below. It's in a different hand, almost like it was added later." He studied it carefully, his lips moving silently as he worked through the translation. "I, Amen-Hamat, guardian of sacred knowledge, bind these words with my final breath. He who speaks aloud the sacred text awakens the serpent that sleeps within the walls of eternity." As the final word left his lips, a sudden gust of wind swept through the excavation site, extinguishing their lamps and filling the air with the dust. For a brief moment, Nathaniel thought he'd heard a sound like distant, hissing laughter. "Dramatic timing," Malik joked, relighting the lamps. "The ancient Egyptians would approve." They made camp for the night, planning to open the tomb at first light. Around the fire they discussed their find, speculating about what treasures might lie within. Only Sarah seemed uneasy, wrapping her jacket tighter despite the warm evening. "I don't feel well," she admitted when Nathaniel asked. "Probably just exhaustion." By morning, Sarah's condition had worsened. Her skin burned with fever, and she complained that her throat felt as though she had swallowed glass. Nathaniel wanted to take her back to Cairo immediately, but she insisted he open the tomb first. "We've worked too hard to turn back now," she argued. "I'll rest in the tent. Go make your discovery." Reluctantly, he agreed. With Eliza and Malik, he carefully removed the entrance stones, revealing a dark corridor leading deep into the earth. The air that escaped from within was stale but carried an unusual scent, something sweet and cloying like overripe fruit. "Let's proceed carefully," Nathaniel warned. "This tomb has been sealed for thousands of years." They moved slowly down the corridor, documenting everything. The walls were covered with elaborate paintings depicting Amenemhet's journey to the afterlife. But something was off about these images. In some scenes, the priest appeared to be commanding strange, serpentine creatures that wrapped around human figures, their mouths open at the victim's ears. "This is bizarre," Eliza murmured, photographing the unusual hieroglyphics that accompanied the images. "It looks like he's described some kind of ritual here, something about binding words to breath." In the burial chamber, they found Amenemhet's sarcophagus, remarkably intact. Around it lay ceremonial objects, canopic jars, Ushabti figures, and a small wooden chest inlaid with ivory and lapis lazuli. Nathaniel carefully opened the chest. Inside lay a papyrus scroll preserved in the dry desert air. With trembling hands he unrolled it, revealing column after column of hieratic script. "Incredible!" he whispered. "This appears to be Amenemhet's personal spell book." As Nathaniel began to translate the first few lines aloud, Malik suddenly grabbed his arm. "Professor, look!" From a small crack in the sarcophagus lid, a fine, dark sand was trickling out. That's not possible," Eliza whispered. The sand continued to pour, increasing in volume until it spilled over the sides of the sarcophagus. Then, to their horror, it began to move against gravity, forming a swirling pattern in the air. Nathaniel thought he could see shapes within it, coiling, serpentine forms that seemed to be reaching toward them. "Get out!" he shouted, dropping the papyrus. "Now!" They fled the tomb, the strange dark sand pursuing them like a living shadow. As they emerged into the sunlight, Nathaniel looked back to see the sand dissipate at the threshold, retreating into the darkness. Back at camp, they found Sarah unconscious, her breathing shallow and labored. Her skin was covered in strange, scale-like marks that spread before their eyes. That evening, the satellite phone brought more disturbing news. Their university colleagues in Cairo had fallen suddenly ill, exactly 12 hours after Nathaniel had translated the warning aloud. The symptoms matched Sarah's exactly. Over the next 3 days, as they raced back to Cairo, Nathaniel watched helplessly as his wife's condition deteriorated. The doctors were baffled by the illness, a respiratory infection unlike anything they'd seen, resistant to all treatment. The skin around Sarah's throat and chest hardened into scale-like patterns, and when she coughed, a fine, dark dust came up. One by one, everyone who had been in contact with the expedition fell ill. Eliza and Malik were hospitalized within hours of reaching Cairo. 3 days later, Malik was gone. Nathaniel's parents, who had visited them in the hospital, began showing symptoms the next day. Only Nathaniel remained strangely untouched by the illness, though he carried the heaviest guilt. He had spoken the words aloud. He had awakened whatever ancient horror had been bound within those hieroglyphics. In desperation, he returned to his notes and photographs of the tomb. There had to be something he missed, some clue to stopping what he had started. For days, he worked without sleep, translating and retranslating every symbol. Then he found it, a small inscription hidden within the decorative border of the burial chamber. It described not a curse, but a binding spell. Amenemhet hadn't been warning tomb robbers. He'd been containing something that transmitted through spoken words, spreading from person to person like echoes. The serpent that sleeps within the walls of eternity wasn't metaphorical. It was a description of an ancient disease, one that Amenemhet had somehow captured and bound with his final breath. Nathaniel returned to the tomb alone, against all advice. The entrance remained open, dark, and waiting. Inside, The sarcophagus stood as they had left it, the dark sand now still within its confines. With shaking hands, Nathaniel unfolded his notes and began to recite the counterspell he had pieced together. The hieroglyphics seemed to shimmer as he spoke, the air in the chamber growing thick and hard to breathe. From the sarcophagus, the dark sand rose again, swirling around him, entering his lungs with every syllable. He continued the recitation, even as he felt the sand filling him from within. As he spoke the final words, he felt something tear loose inside him, a burning pain that dropped him to his knees. He coughed violently, expelling clouds of the dark sand. It swirled once more above the sarcophagus, then settled back inside it. The lid slid shut with a final heavy sound. When Nathaniel returned to Cairo, he found Sarah's condition improving. The scale-like patterns were fading, her breathing easing. Over the next week, all the victims began to recover, all except those who had already succumbed. The official report blamed a rare fungal infection, disturbed after centuries of dormancy in the tomb. The site was quarantined, the entrance resealed. The academic world mourned the loss of Malik and 3 others, praising Nathaniel for his quick work in identifying the pathogen. Only Nathaniel knew the truth. Sometimes in the dark of night, he would wake to find grains of dark sand on his pillow. Sometimes when he spoke, he could hear a faint, echoing whisper beneath his own voice. And in his dreams, hieroglyphics danced behind his eyelids, ancient words binding him to something that now lived within, waiting to be released. For Amun-Amit's binding spell had worked after all. The serpent had found a new host, and Nathaniel knew that when he died, he must be buried with the same warnings carved above his grave, to bind what he now carried until the next unfortunate scholar spoke the words aloud. I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Welcome, Weirdos! I'm Darren Marlar, and this is Weird Darkness. Here you'll find stories of the paranormal, supernatural, legends, lore, the strange and bizarre, crime, conspiracy, mysterious, macabre, unsolved, and unexplained. Coming up in this episode, they say grief lingers in the house where children were murdered, but so does something colder, crueler, and far more dangerous. In the haunted heart of Edinburgh, there's a pub where the drinks are strong and the screams are stronger. The last person to see Virginia alive passed a polygraph, but his wife said he didn't come home until hours later. Asteroids, alien civilizations, even cosmic plagues — the real terror isn't what we can see in the sky, it's what we can't see. It started with flirtation, turned into an affair, and ended with a gunshot echoing through the cold night air in a Walgreens parking lot. But first, they carved their warnings into stone 4,000 years ago. And now, after centuries of silence, the hieroglyphic curses of the dead are being read aloud once again. But in doing so, are we inviting doom and destruction? We begin there. Now, bolt your doors, lock your windows, turn off your lights, and come with me into the weird darkness. Beneath the shifting sands of Egypt, secrets older than civilization itself lie buried, carved in stone, etched in symbols, and whispered across 5,000 years of silence. These weren't just decorative markings. They were warnings, threats, promises of supernatural vengeance. Around 3200 BC, The ancient Egyptians developed one of the earliest known writing systems, the cryptic and arcane hieroglyphics. These mysterious picture symbols adorned the walls of temples and tombs, visible only to those allowed inside, and understood only by trained scribes and priests. In time, the Egyptians created faster ways to write, the hieratic script around 2600 BC, and later the even more streamlined Demotic script by 700 BC. But to the modern world, those symbols remained quiet, unreadable, unknowable, until 1822, when French scholar Jean-François Champollion cracked the code. For the first time in thousands of years, ancient voices began to speak again. And some of those voices carried threats, dark ones, because hidden in the hieroglyphics carved into tombs and walls were curses, bone-chilling curses meant to terrify anyone foolish enough to disturb the dead. Among the earliest recorded curses are the so-called execration texts, dating back 4,000 years to the 24th through 22nd centuries BC. These weren't tomb curses, they were aimed at enemies, foreign threats to Egypt's power and stability. In these rituals, names of enemies were inscribed onto pottery figures shaped like human figures, symbols of the people Egypt wished to destroy. Accompanying the names were phrases of death and mutilation: "Slaughter him with a knife," "Smite him with a spear." Then, in a grim ceremony, the figurines were ritually shattered, their broken bodies buried near sacred sites and cemeteries. The message was clear: break the body, destroy the soul. The shattered pottery wasn't just symbolic. The Egyptians believed this act inflicted real-world suffering on their enemies. It was curse magic, and they took it seriously. Around 2300 BC, during the 6th dynasty, an explorer named Harkuf left behind more than just stories of faraway expeditions. He left a warning carved into his tomb. His curse reads, quote, "As for any man who shall enter into this tomb, I will seize him like a wild fowl. He shall be judged by the great God." Unquote. Compared to later threats, this might sound almost polite, but to the ancient Egyptians, being judged by the great God wasn't a metaphor. It was a cosmic death sentence. Harkuf promised to hunt down anyone who violated his tomb, capture them like birds, and deliver them to the gods for eternal judgment. To someone in that time and place, it was a fate worse than death. A few centuries later, around 2100 BC, a nobleman named Anktifi, a powerful regional governor who never quite became pharaoh, had his tomb inscribed with a chilling curse. It warned that any future ruler or grave robber who dared damage his coffin would be forsaken by the god Hemen. Worse still, the intruder's children would be cursed, stripped of their inheritance. Today, archaeologists have studied Anktifi's tomb without incident, but in ancient times, such a threat would have been enough to keep even the boldest tomb raiders far, far away. At the necropolis of Saqqara stands the mastaba, a flat-roofed tomb of Kentika Ikeki, a figure from Egypt's Old Kingdom. Inside, the walls carry one of the most aggressive threats carved in ancient stone. "As for all men who shall enter this my tomb impure, I shall seize his neck like a bird." The American University of Cairo has noted that curses like these were common in Saqqara, and their meaning was gruesome. The phrase, "like a bird," was no poetic turn of phrase. It meant wringing the neck like a goose. It was a violent image. The dead themselves promised to reach beyond the grave to choke the life from trespassers, strangle them, break them, leave them gasping in terror. Also in Saqqara lies the tomb of Hezi, a nobleman of Egypt's Old Kingdom. His life was recorded in hieroglyphs, but so was his warning to the living, and his was bizarre. Quote, "As for anyone who will enter this tomb after he has eaten abominations or after he has copulated with women, I will be judged with him in the council of the great God." Unquote. Hezzy's concern wasn't just about intrusion, it was about purity. If someone entered his tomb in a defiled state, Hezzy himself would suffer judgment right alongside them. That shared punishment makes this curse stand out. One man, thousands of years ago, begging to be left undisturbed, not just for his sake, but for the sake of his eternal soul. Around 1900 BC, during Egypt's 12th dynasty, another regional governor named Serenput I crafted a curse so elaborate it reads like a nightmare checklist of divine revenge. His warning targeted anyone who dared steal offerings left for the statue in his tomb, saying, quote, "Their arm would be cut off like that of a bull. Their neck would be twisted off like that of a bird. Their political office, gone. Their children's future, erased. Their home in Nubia, their tomb in the necropolis, vanished. Their god would reject them, their flesh and children would belong to fire, and their corpse would never find rest in the earth." Unquote. Then came the final personal touch. Serenput himself promised to become a crocodile in water, a serpent on land, and a vengeful force in the afterlife, hunting the violator without end. He didn't just write a curse, he wrote a spiritual death sentence across all realms. Another grim warning waits in the tomb of Ankh-Mahar, a priest of Saqqara, but his words don't call on the gods, they call on himself. His curse reads, quote, "As for that which anyone might do against this my tomb, the same will be done to his property. I am an excellent priest, knowledgeable in secret spells and all forms of magic, and as for anyone who enters my tomb impure or who does not purify themselves, I shall seize him like a goose and fill him with fear at seeing ghosts upon the earth." Unquote. No gods, no crocodiles, just Ankh-Mahar, the excellent priest, promising to haunt, terrorize, and mentally destroy anyone who trespassed, not just with harm, but with madness. Fast forward to the 18th dynasty, around 1450 BC. Senenmut was no ordinary man. He served as royal advisor to Queen Hatshepsut, and some scholars whisper he may have been her lover. He earned a rare honor, burial near the queen's own tomb. His final curse was blunt and bone-chilling. His lifetime shall not exist on earth. Not imprisonment, not suffering, erasure. Despite the threat, archaeologists have entered his tomb many times, uncovering critical details about life during Hatshepsut's reign. But Senenmut's curse still lingers, watching, waiting. Near Luxor, in the ancient cemetery of Sheikh Abdelkruna, a single stone slab carried a warning that feels eerily modern. Quote, "Watch out not to take a pebble from within it outside. If you find this stone, you shall not transgress against it. Indeed, the gods, since the time of Prey, those who rest in the mountains gain strength every day, even though their pebbles are dragged away." Unquote. It wasn't just the dead you had to worry about, it was the land itself. Even removing a single pebble could invoke the wrath of ancient gods. And yet the stone, with the warning itself, now resides in the National Museum of Scotland. So far, no curse has manifested. Or has it? Finally, we arrive at perhaps the most terrifying curse of them all. Hidden in the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep in the Valley of the Kings. His warning reads like a checklist of every punishment the ancient mind could imagine. Anyone who dared disturb the tomb would lose all their worldly possessions, drown painfully at sea, burn to death in a fiery furnace, be denied a tomb, a funeral, and a legacy, slowly starve, and have their bones destroyed, robbing them of any chance at an afterlife. The curse keeps going, threatening even more horrors to those foolish enough to break the pharaoh's eternal slumber. And yet modern archaeologists have entered the tomb. They've cataloged its treasures, studied its walls. So far, no fiery deaths, No drowned researchers, no sudden disappearances, at least not that we know of. For millennia, these curses lay silent, etched in stone, buried in darkness, forgotten as language faded. But now we can read them again. We understand what they said and what they threatened. They were never just decoration. They were warnings. The next time you visit a museum and gaze at Egyptian relics, remember this: those relics may have once been protected by spells, sealed by ancient beliefs, and cursed to punish the living. And somewhere in the deep sands of Egypt, the dead still wait, watching, listening, and perhaps whispering, "Stay away, disturb us, and suffer." Coming up, looking up at the stars tonight? Be careful, they're looking back, and something dangerous might be heading our way. Plus, a ghost child, a wailing banshee, and a pub toilet haunted by a man named Old Jacques. Step inside the Banshee Labyrinth. But first, in 1948, Virginia Carpenter planned to start a new life in Denton. Instead, she became one of Texas' most haunting cold cases. Step into the shadows with Tainted, a bone-chilling collection designed to haunt your darkest nights. Tales filled with a spectrum of horrors, from evil spirits to bleeding caves, haunted sewers, and sinister childhood games. In this installment of the Dark Intrigues book series, J.C. Moore delves deep into the darkest recesses of the human psyche. Brace yourself for a modern journey through the twisted corridors of terror. Listen if you dare. In this book, the ordinary become ominous, the mundane turns malefic, and they reveal the tainted secrets of the human heart in all their gruesome glory. Dark Intrigues, Tainted, a collection of short horror stories by J.C. Moore. Purchase the audiobook or hear a sample on the audiobooks page at WeirdDarkness.com. On June 1, 1948, a young woman named Virginia Carpenter left her home in Texarkana, Texas, bound for the Texas State College for Women in Denton. But she never started her classes. To this day, what happened to Virginia remains a baffling mystery and one that will likely never be solved. Virginia was only 21 years old at the time of her disappearance. She was a pretty girl with lots of friends, a bubbly personality, and ambitions to make something of herself. She had recently enrolled at the Texas State College for Women and planned to become a laboratory technician. She had previously attended Texarkana Junior College and had saved her money to continue her education. She dreamed of pursuing a career in laboratory sciences, but sadly, those dreams would never come true. She boarded a train in Texarkana on the afternoon of June 1st. She was on her way to the Denton campus to start her summer classes. When she got off the train at the station in Denton, she hailed a taxi, which took her to her college home at Brackenridge Hall. The driver, Edgar Ray Jack Zachary, later told police that he arrived at the dorm around 9:30 p.m. When they stopped, Zachary saw two men in a convertible parked in front who called out to her. According to the driver, Virginia seemed to know them and replied, "Well, what are y'all doing here?" Virginia's trunk had not yet arrived, so she paid Zachary $1 to pick them up from the train station the following morning. Virginia did have suitcases in the taxi, but she told the driver that the two men would assist her with them. She said she knew them. Zachary said the three were talking when he drove away. Virginia gave him a smile and a wave, and that was the last reported sighting of her. Virginia never checked into her dormitory that night. Zachary did pick up her trunk at the station the next morning and dropped it off at Breckenridge Hall. The police later found it unopened, sitting by the front door. The identities of the two men who met her outside the hall remain a mystery. The only information that detectives ever had was a description given by Zachary, who didn't pay much attention to them since Virginia obviously knew them. One was tall, he said, the other was short and stocky. Their car was cream-colored. On June 4, Virginia's boyfriend, Kenny Branham, contacted Virginia's mother and told her that he'd not been able to get in touch with her. Virginia's mother contacted the college and discovered that Virginia had never checked into her room and had not attended any of her classes. The following day, she contacted the authorities in Denton and reported that Virginia was missing. With so little to go on, the police targeted Kenny Branham and Jack Zachary, the cab driver. Branham passed the polygraph tests that were given to him and insisted that Virginia had not run away. She didn't have another boyfriend, no jealous former lovers, and had no reason to run away. She was very excited about starting at the new college. Kenny was also the first to report her missing. Why would he have called the police if he had been involved? The investigation then turned to the cabbie, who was the last person to see Virginia alive. In 1948, Zachary and his wife both claimed that the taxi driver was home by 10 p.m. and that Zachary went back to the hall the next day to drop off the trunk. In 1957, though, the story changed. Zachary's wife, by then his ex-wife, told the police that she had lied at the time of the disappearance. She said that he did not actually come home until 2 or 3 a.m. She had no idea where he had been. But Zachary was questioned many times during the investigation. Investigators always believed that he was being cooperative. He passed multiple polygraph tests and was never charged. His ex-wife's new statement to the police was never given much weight. He was never really a serious suspect and maintained that he had no idea what happened to Virginia until his death in 1984. In the weeks and months that followed Virginia's vanishing, alleged sightings of the young woman came in from all parts of South Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. One of the few reports that were taken seriously came from a bus ticket agent in DeQueen, Arkansas, who claimed that on the night of June 11, a young woman had gotten off a bus from Texarkana and found a seat in the station's lobby. She matched Virginia's description. She seemed nervous, walked around, and asked about local hotels. A few minutes later, a man in his mid-20s with light brown hair came into the station, and the two of them left together. A short time later, the agent received a telephone call from an unknown woman. The caller asked if Miss Virginia Carpenter was in the station. But this sighting, along with all the others, was never confirmed. By late 1948, the case had grown cold. There were simply no clues as to where Virginia could have gone. In 1955, she was legally declared dead. Over the years, new leads and theories have been few and far between, but the case has not been forgotten altogether. In 1998, the police received a tip from a man in his 70s who claimed to not only know who killed Virginia, but where her body had been buried. He claimed the two men who met her at the dorm that night raped and killed her, then buried her. Police searched the alleged burial site that the man told them about, but found no remains. Investigators stated that the two suspects who were named by the informant were both deceased. Their names could not be released to the public. And there was one other thing, which may be nothing but a coincidence, but it's worth mentioning. Virginia grew up in Texarkana, which was the scene of a murder spree in 1946 that has also never been solved. The murderer, dubbed the Phantom Killer, terrorized the region and has spawned both books and films. And while that case seems to have nothing to do with a young girl's disappearance 2 years later, there is one intriguing fact about that case that ties it to this one. Virginia Carpenter knew 3 of the Phantom Killer's victims. The night sky seems peaceful when viewed from Earth. Stars twinkle, the moon glows softly. But beyond that serene veil lies a universe filled with potential threats that silently watch our tiny blue planet. Take asteroid 2024 YR4, for instance. Scientists discovered this massive space rock in 2024, and for a brief, terrifying moment, they calculated it had more than a 1% chance of striking Earth in the early 2030s. A city killer, they called it. Though the odds have dropped now to about 0.001%, the asteroid still lurks out there, following its cosmic path that intersects with our own. The dinosaurs never saw their doom coming, if you subscribe to that narrative. And if true, the massive impact wiped them out in a flash of fire and dust. Humans, however, can see the threats approaching, if they look carefully enough. But there's something strange about the way people fear space. While natural disasters and wars pose immediate dangers, it's often the cosmic threats that capture our darkest imaginations. Perhaps it's because space represents the ultimate unknown, a void where anything might be lurking, watching, waiting. Professor Daniel Dewdney from Johns Hopkins University has warned of another disturbing possibility. The very technologies designed to protect Earth from asteroids could be twisted to guide them towards us as weapons in future conflicts. In his ominously titled book, Dark Skies, which I've linked to in the episode description, he suggests humanity might need to pull back from space exploration for centuries until we are truly ready for what waits beyond our atmosphere. But pulling back seems impossible now. The political momentum pushing us into space grows stronger every year. The fear grows alongside it. These fears aren't new. They've been with us since the beginning. One of humanity's oldest known stories, the tale of the cosmic hunt from at least 15,000 years ago, speaks of disaster coming from above. In one version, passed down by the indigenous Sami people of Scandinavia, a hunter in the sky fires an arrow that misses its target and strikes the pole star, causing the entire night sky to come crashing down upon Earth. Modern fears have taken new forms. Some believe in hostile visitors from other worlds. Others worry about secret government conspiracies hiding the truth about what lurks above. Chinese science fiction author Cixin Liu captured this dread perfectly when he compared space to a dark forest where alien civilizations hide from one another, afraid to reveal their positions. There's even a strange theory that viruses come from space. When COVID-19 spread across the planet, some skeptics claimed it arrived via a meteor that exploded over China. This bizarre idea came from astrophysicists Fred Hoyle and Chandra Wickramasinghe, who suggested in 1979 that viruses and bacteria regularly rain down from the cosmos. All these fears reveal something curious about humans. We see space as separate from Earth, as an outside that threatens our safe inside. Scientists call this ground bias, the false belief that Earth somehow exists apart from the universe that created it. The truth is both simpler and more unsettling. Earth is not separate from space. It is a tiny speck floating in it. The boundary between up there and down here exists only in our minds. So as you look up at the night sky tonight, remember, we are not looking out at space. We are already in it, hurtling through the darkness at thousands of miles per hour, surrounded by cosmic threats both real and imagined. And in the long run, unless humans find ways to redirect them, something big will eventually hit us. The responsibility for preparation begins with us. What better place for a haunting than a rock and metal bar buried in the shadows of Edinburgh's Old Town? Nestled along the twisting ancient streets of Niddry, just a stone's throw from the Royal Mile, lies a pub with a reputation far darker than its drinks menu, a place where screams echo underground, and the dead never quite seem to leave. It's called the Banshee Labyrinth, and by all appearances it's a family-run bar that promises good drinks, loud music, and horror movie nights. But beneath the laughter, the bass lines and the clinking of pint glasses, something else stirs, something older, something sinister. You see, this bar isn't just near the haunted underground vaults of Edinburgh. Part of it is the vaults. During the 18th century, South Bridge was built to connect Edinburgh's old and new towns. Beneath its stone spine, rooms were carved into the arches, vaults that soon filled with taverns, brothels, workshops, and the kind of secrets that tend to rot rather than fade. Because the bridge was never properly sealed, dampness flooded the spaces. The legitimate businesses fled. What remained were criminals, vagrants, and victims. People died in those tunnels. Some were murdered. Others simply vanished. It was in these same vaults that two of Edinburgh's most notorious murderers, Burke and Hare, were said to have prowled, hunting for fresh corpses to sell to the city's surgeons. And today, part of that legacy is quite literally part of the Banshee Labyrinth. It's not just a clever name. The bar takes its title from the spirit said to haunt the space, a banshee, a wailing omen of death from Celtic legend. And more than one person has claimed to hear the scream. During a round of renovations some years back, workers in the bar reported a chilling sound, a high, keening wail that pierced the silence like a knife through flesh. One of the men swore he saw her, a woman in a gray dress, her face buried in her hands. When she looked up, her face was pale, eyeless, and grinning through rotted teeth. Moments later, the worker received a phone call. A member of his family had just died. Coincidence? Maybe. But that kind of thing tends to happen a lot at the Banshee Labyrinth. Then there's Molly, a ghostly child no more than 6 years old. Her name was discovered inside a bricked-up chimney on a child's old shoe. She reportedly vanished in 1814 and never left. Patrons and staff alike claim to hear the giggling when no children are present. Others say she's been peeking around corners, only to vanish into thin air. And if you happen to be using the ladies' toilet, you might meet Old Jock, another ghost said to haunt the bar. He's fond of slamming stall doors and playing with the hand dryers. No one's quite sure who he was in life, but in death, he's a mischievous regular. And the darkness doesn't stop at the bar's walls. Just next door once stood the home of Lord Nichol Edwards, a Lord Provost in the 17th century, and a man known for his cruelty. Legend says he kept a private dungeon beneath his home where he tortured accused witches before handing them off for trial. Some believe one of those tortured souls became the Banshee herself, a woman so tormented in life that her agony echoed into the afterlife. Glassware doesn't always stay put at the Banshee Labyrinth. Drinks have been known to lift from tables and hurl across the room. Cold spots appear where there should be warmth. Shadows flit across the floor with no source. It's a place where the veil is thin, and the spirits pour freely, both in a glass and from the grave. So if you ever find yourself in Edinburgh, craving a pint and maybe a peek into the afterlife, step inside the Banshee Labyrinth. Just don't be surprised if someone, or something, follows you home. When Weird Darkness returns, there were no masks, no mystery, and no mercy. Just one man's rage and another man's blood soaking into the pavement of a Walgreens parking lot. Plus, 3 children butchered with an axe, a man hanged in his cell, and a cemetery that refuses to rest. It's one of Wisconsin's darkest ghost stories. Hey Weirdos! My email newsletter is now available through Substack. Whether you decide to read the newsletter via email or in the Substack app, you can subscribe absolutely free for updates on what's happening behind the scenes, get updates on upcoming events, find out when there are sales taking place in the Weird Darkness store, receive an updated list of where I'll be taking Weird Darkness on the road to paranormal conferences and horror conventions. Plus, you'll also get my regular humor column, Mind of Marlar, where at least once a week I put a comedic twist on strange and macabre stories in written form. You get all of that and more in my free Substack email newsletter. Just click on Newsletter at WeirdDarkness.com to subscribe. That's WeirdDarkness.com/newsletter. In the cold glow of a Walgreens parking lot, silence shattered beneath the sharp crack of 3 gunshots. The echoes bounced off empty car doors and faded into the quiet of a March night. Blood pooled on the pavement. 2 men lay broken beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights. 1 dead, 1 dying. What began as a secret affair had twisted itself into something far darker, something deadlier. The story begins in 2010, in Meridian, Idaho, a small city that seemed too quiet for the kind of drama that would soon unfold. Emmett Corrigan, a young, ambitious attorney, had just launched his own law firm. He had a beautiful wife, Ashley, a woman he'd met at a university gym, and together they were raising 4 children, with a 5th on the way. Their life looked like a picture-perfect postcard, stable, devout, rooted in family and faith. But behind closed doors, things were unraveling. Ashley noticed her husband pulling away. The man who used to rush home to his family now worked late, spent hours at the gym, and came home moody and distant. Their children asked if Daddy still lived with them. Ashley had her suspicions, and she was right. Across town lived Rob and Candy Hall, a couple who, like the Corrigans, had once been full of promise. They'd moved from California to Idaho in search of a fresh start. Rob worked in IT for the Ada County Sheriff's Office. Candy was a seasoned paralegal. But their marriage had taken hits. Rob confessed to an affair. Candy stayed, hoping to patch things together. Then came the layoff, another blow to Candy's confidence. That's when she met Emmett Corrigan. He needed help at his new firm. She needed a job. And in what seemed like fate, or perhaps something far crueler, they were introduced by a mutual friend. Emmett hired Candy immediately, not just for her resume, but for her presence. Their chemistry was electric, and before long they were entangled in a full-blown affair. At work they barely bothered to hide it, but at home their spouses were left in the dark. For a while. Emmett, tired of the demands of fatherhood and faith, had found something different in Candy – escape. Then came March 11th, 2011. That night, Ashley and Emmett argued. She begged him to go to counseling. He called her crazy. He stormed out of the house, saying that he was going to Walgreens. Elsewhere, Rob Hall had just discovered the truth. Damning text messages between his wife and Emmett. The betrayal was no longer suspicion. It was real, and it cut deep. Candy left the house too, saying she had to go to Walgreens. It was there, under the cold lights and sterile shadows of that suburban parking lot, that Candy met Emmett. They drove to a nearby subdivision. They had sex in the back of Emmett's truck. And then they returned, to Walgreens, unaware that Rob was already there waiting. He had a gun. What happened next is a matter of debate, memory, and motive. Voices were raised. Candy tried to calm the situation, walking Rob back to his vehicle. She turned away, then 3 shots rang out into the night. Candy spun around. Rob was on the ground, shot in the head. Nearby, Emmett lay dying, bullets through his heart and skull. His body shuddered one last time before going still. Police arrived to find Emmett Corrigan dead on the pavement. Rob Hall was rushed to the hospital. He would survive, but claimed to have no memory of what happened after arriving at the scene. He was charged with first-degree murder. At trial, prosecutors painted Rob as a jealous husband who came to Walgreens with one goal – to kill his wife's lover. But Rob's defense told a different story. They claimed Emmett, high on amphetamines and steroids found in his truck, had attacked first, that Emmett had wrestled the gun away, shot Rob in the head, only for Rob to wrestle it back and fire twice in self-defense. Candy's story? It changed, over and over, so much that the judge called her the most discredited witness he'd ever seen. In 2012, Rob Hall was convicted, not of premeditated murder but second degree. He was sentenced to 30 years behind bars. He remains in prison today, eligible for parole in 2028. He still insists he doesn't remember what happened that night. Candy didn't walk away untouched. 2 months after Emmett's death, she was arrested for grand theft, accused of embezzling funds from her previous job at a law firm. She pled guilty. She served 2 years. Ashley Corrigan rebuilt her life. She remarried and somehow found the strength to forgive both Rob and Candy Hall. She now speaks to others about trauma and healing. She urges people to prioritize their families, advice she wishes her first husband had followed. 3 shots in the dark. 3 families forever changed. A Walgreens lot stained with blood and regret. Because in the end, the secrets we think we've buried, they always find their way into the light. This next story is based on an article written by my friend Kathy Kressall at the Haunted Rockford YouTube channel. She's narrating her own stories there of crime, the paranormal, and all things mysterious from articles she writes about the northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin area. I highly recommend you check out her channel and subscribe to show your support. I've placed a link to the Haunted Rockford YouTube channel in the show notes with the list of sources for this episode. The Wisconsin State Prison in Waupun has long been a place where walls have heard whispered confessions and cries that never reached the sky. But beyond the cell blocks and steel bars lies a place even more forgotten, a secluded cemetery, 2 miles away from the prison grounds, where the nameless and unwanted are laid to rest. No headstones, no flowers, no visitors. Just rows of unmarked graves, sunken and still, guarded only by time and shadows. This patch of land is known simply as the State Prison Cemetery. It has no official sign, no paved path, and no memories beyond the ones that linger in silence. It exists for the inmates who died behind bars and whose families refused to claim their bodies. Others never had anyone to claim them at all. They were buried here, one by one, and left to fade into obscurity. Most of the time, the graveyard is quiet, peaceful even, but not always. Some who venture here speak of an overwhelming sorrow that clings to the air like fog. Others report a crawling sensation on the back of the neck, as if unseen eyes were watching from beneath the soil. And then there are those who sense something angrier, something more restless, a spirit that hasn't forgotten and certainly hasn't forgiven. One name among the faceless dead still echoes loudest: Peter Fram, or Fromm, depending on which newspaper you read. He died inside the prison in 1871, but his story began years earlier in Burlington, Wisconsin, with one of the most horrific crimes the state had ever seen. Peter wasn't always a ghost story. In 1865, he was just a hired man working the winter months for a respected local farmer named Anton Cook. Anton owned a large spread of land, 130 acres just outside Burlington. He lived there with his young Bavarian wife, Amelia, who was 25 years his junior. Together, they had 3 small children: 4-year-old Joseph, 2-year-old Anna Barbara, and a newborn son named Ernest. The 12-year-old niece, also named Amelia, had recently come to live with them for the winter. December 3, 1865, was a Sunday. A cold but clear morning. Church day. Anton and Amelia decided to leave the children at home that morning, confident that the younger Amelia could watch over the little ones. Peter Fromm, their quiet but reliable hired man, would be nearby doing chores. There seemed little reason to worry. Anton left for church carrying $1,300, a large sum, but he had bills to pay after service and believed the money safer with him than left at home. Fromm had only been on the property for 7 weeks. He said that he came from Moline, Illinois, and was working to save money before heading west to Iowa. He rarely spoke of his past. When Amelia Cook returned home from church, something was wrong. She said she felt it in her bones before she even saw the house. The front door was open. That was strange. As she approached the woodshed, she spotted a small bundle on the floor. It was her daughter, Barbara. The 2-year-old lay in a pool of blood, gasping for air. Newspapers at the time painted the grisly scene in brutal detail. Barbara's head had been split open, her golden hair clotted with blood, her face covered in gore. Amelia screamed and scooped the child into her arms, rushing into the house, calling for her niece. The house was too quiet. In the parlor, her baby Ernest lay unharmed in his cradle. But in the kitchen, horror returned. Joseph was lying near the stove. He was already gone. Nearby was the 12-year-old niece, also named Amelia. She was barely alive, her injuries catastrophic. In her panic, the elder Amelia could hardly register the nightmare around her. But when she did, when the full weight of what had happened settled into her mind, she staggered out of the house and let out a scream that echoed across the frozen fields. Neighbors walking home from church heard her cries. A group rushed to the farmhouse. One of them ran to fetch Anton. He returned to a scene that would haunt him until the day he died. His children were dead, his niece dying, his wife in shock. Barbara died soon after, in her mother's arms. The niece died not long after. Amelia rocked her as she passed. In just one day, a family had been broken. The murder weapon was still in the house. It lay beside the children's bodies. A bloodied axe. The local doctor examined the victims and confirmed what everyone feared. All 3 had died from skull fractures. It was the blunt side of the axe, he said, and whoever had used it had done so with terrible force. Anton was asked if anything had been stolen. He recalled a small leather pouch containing silver coins that he had kept in a wooden bureau. The bureau had been smashed open. The pouch was missing. Nothing else appeared to have been taken. Whoever committed the crime, it seemed, wasn't after vengeance or passion. It was for money. Anton listed the few people who knew he had received a large payment recently. One stood out: Peter Fromm. Authorities brought Fromm in for questioning. He couldn't explain the blood on his boots. He had no alibi for the time of the murders. The missing coin pouch was found, buried not far from the house. There was no DNA testing in those days, but the bloody boot prints matched Fromm's boots. It was enough. Fromm denied everything, but the public didn't need more proof. Anton Cook was respected, his wife beloved, their murdered children had been innocent. The community called for justice. Fromm was convicted and sent to the Wisconsin State Penitentiary in Waupun. He was 57 years old. Wisconsin didn't have the death penalty, but many in Burlington believed that if anyone deserved to swing, it was the man who had butchered those children. Fromm lived out the next 6 years behind bars. His mental health declined. Guards said he paced his cell, laughing one moment, weeping the next, crying out to God. He never confessed, not once. He maintained his innocence to the end. On the morning of March 21, 1871, a prison guard found him hanging from the bars of his cell. He had torn strips from his shirt to fashion a crude noose. The guards tried to revive him. It was too late. He was 62 years old. No one came to claim his body. There was no funeral, no prayers. His remains were buried in the state prison cemetery among the forgotten in an unmarked grave. But not everyone believes he rests in peace. Visitors to the cemetery report intense feelings of grief and anger. Some say the air thickens as you approach the center of the field. Others claim to hear whispers or feel a cold presence watching from the tree line. Paranormal investigators have recorded unexplained EMF spikes, and one medium claimed to make contact with a man who died screaming his innocence. Could it be Fromm? Maybe. Maybe not. The story doesn't end there. The house where the murders took place still stands in Burlington. It's been renovated and turned into a business, but those who work there say it is far from quiet. Cleaning crews hear footsteps in empty rooms, doors slam on their own, lights flicker, and sometimes in the mirror people claim to see a child standing behind them. One woman whose family once lived in the house reported seeing children playing in the yard when none were around. She even saw them in the barn, which has since been converted into a workspace. She also claimed to see a woman wandering the property, dressed in clothes from another century, her eyes hollow with grief. Could it be Amelia, still searching for her babies? But there is something darker. Visitors speak of a different presence, a shadow that brings fear, not sadness. Some believe it is the true killer, lingering in the place where innocence was stolen. Others think it might be Fromm, twisted by decades of pain, wrongfully accused, consumed by the need for justice. There is a belief in paranormal circles when a spirit dies in anguish, particularly from injustice, it can become vengeful. It may no longer distinguish between the guilty and the innocent. It wants revenge, and it wants to be heard. Is Fromm guilty? We will never know. But this much is clear. The ghosts of that December day in 1865 still echo across time. They cry out from the lonely field of Waupun, from the old farmhouse in Burlington, and from the memories etched into the land itself. Thanks for listening. If you like the show, please share it with someone you know who loves the paranormal or strange stories, true crime, monsters, or unsolved mysteries like you do. All stories used in Weird Darkness are purported to be true unless stated otherwise, and you can find links to the authors, stories, and sources I used in the episode description. Weird Darkness is a registered trademark. Copyright Weird Darkness. And now that we're coming out of the dark, I'll leave you with a little light. Proverbs 13, verse 4, "The sluggard craves and gets nothing, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied." And a final thought. Few rich men own their property. The property owns them. Robert G. Ingersoll. I'm Darren Marlar. Thanks for joining me in the Weird Darkness.
This is the end of our video. Thanks for watching.